Good afternoon, everyone. Today's date is February 16th, and this is Senate Judiciary and Crime Prevention Committee. And we will be, let the record show that we do have quorum. We have 3 bills to consider today, but all of them will be laid over. The first bill is Senate File 2846, Senator Chamberlain. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members.
You may proceed. Is this the first time we've had you before our Judiciary Committee?
No, it isn't, Mr. Chair. I was told to be brief, and I will leave any other comments about that.
Well, every committee tells you to be brief, but it doesn't seem to work.
This committee is known for its brevity. I've been here, I know.
Mr. Chairman, can we treat it like it's his first time at the committee?
I think it's his first time this year in front of us.
I have nothing but praise for the Judiciary Committee, no matter what people say. Thank you, members, Mr. Chair. I have Senate File 2846. This is part of our package of public safety bills and an ongoing effort to recruit and retain quality police officers both in cities and across the state. 2846 is a recruitment proposal. It's simply something that's been used quite often, both, I think, in this state as well as in the private sector. In short, what it does, it will reimburse persons, police officers, licensed police officers, who have completed who are licensed, obviously, and they completed courses to get there. It'll reimburse some of their tuition costs, college costs. There are conditions to it. There's eligible police officers. There's a licensed police officer, as defined by statute. It's used to pay for tuition and other post-secondary fees. There are caps, a cap of $5,000. You already have to be serving and have served for 12 months. It's 2 pages. It's pretty straightforward. And again, the quick summary is $2.5 million fiscal '23, the rest of this biennium, to reimburse police officers, licensed police officers who have tuition costs. It'll pay up to $5,000 for tuition cost reimbursements. Sorry about that. But that's the bill.
Is there anyone giving testimony today? All right. Senator Bingham has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just had 2 quick questions. One, the Post Board did have concerns about doing a grant for the PSAs and that Senator Housley's bill. Are they okay doing a grant for this, Senator Chamberlain? Have you had a chance to talk to Post Board since they'll be administering this?
Senator Chamberlain.
Mr. Chair, Senator Bingham, I have not spoke to the Post Board directly, but we can work out any of those issues if they so desire. This is a pretty common practice.
Senator Bingham, just for the record, we did inform the department and would welcome their comments, but they have not shown.
Okay.
Senator Bingham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I like this idea. I think it's great. I just was wondering if maybe the Department of Education or higher education might be a better suited fit for it and having its own account to do this. And then my final question is can this be used for tuition buyback? So say somebody has $50,000 in debt, can they apply for this grant at some point to put towards any student loan debt?
Senator.
Mr. Chair and Senator Bingham, no, it's just for those costs directly related to obtaining the degree and becoming post-certified and licensed.
So you're saying it's prospective?
Yes.
Right. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Oh, Senator Papp or Latz?
Mr. Chairman, I'll defer to Senator Pappas first.
All right. Senator Pappas?
If that's okay with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually want to reiterate as a former higher ed chair that it's much more appropriate for the Office of Higher Education to be handling educational grants. So I would I would encourage the chair and the author, as you pursue this further, that you really do consider having the Office of Higher Education administer it. They have the experience, they have the staff, they're used to doing this. We've heard repeatedly that the post board is not comfortable with doing this. And in this case, the Office of Higher Education is more appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Pappas. Senator Latz now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, I'd like to clarify, would these be grants to the individual police officers, not to their departments?
Senator Chamberlain?
Mr. Chair, Senator Latz, it would go through the way it's structured now, barring any changes, for example, going through higher ed, it would go to the post board, and the post board would reimburse the officer individually.
Any further questions?
Okay. Yes, Mr. Chairman, how would this fit in with loan forgiveness programs that are already in place? I mean, I believe there's a public service loan forgiveness program that's eligible after 120 payments have been made. Now that might be somewhere down the road, and maybe this money would be gone by the time we got to the point of 120 payments for people who incurred tuition expenses on or after July 1st, 2021. But is there anything explicit here that, or implicit, that would address the question of its interaction with loan forgiveness programs?
Senator Chamberlain?
Mr. Chair, Senator Latz, there's nothing there's no reference to the loan forgiveness program in this
Senator
proposal.
Chamberlain, perhaps if members look at page 2 of the bill, lines 1 through 4, there is a reference. It reads, an eligible peace officer may not receive reimbursement for any amount paid by a third party or reimbursed by any other entity or any amount of a loan that was forgiven or is eligible to be forgiven from money borrowed from a financial institution or other entity. So, Senator Latz, would that cover your question?
Mr. Chairman, it appears that it probably would. And so maybe in terms of interaction with the public service loan forgiveness program, since the first 120 payments are not eligible for loan forgiveness under that program, they might be eligible for tuition reimbursement here. So I guess one other question, how would this applies, I think by its own terms, to people who, start work after July 1, 2021, or they incur the educational expenses after that time? I guess I should glance at the actual bill language.
Yeah.
Be employed as a peace officer after July 1, 2021, and has been employed for at least 12 months. So it sounds like people who choose to go to school now, or let's say this passes, if this is a recruitment tool, then, and it won't take effect until July 1, 2022, you've got people who have already chosen to go to peace officer or to school for this education program. They will have already, if they got hired right out of school, let's say they would have actually had to have already finished school by May or June of 2021, started employment July 1, worked for a year, and then they would be eligible to apply for reimbursement going back at that point over a year in terms of tuition reimbursement. So, this sounds like it could be a valuable program very prospectively to get people in the pipeline, but the pipeline you're going to get them into is going to be at least several years long before they'll ever see any reimbursement. I mean, if the goal here is to recruit, then it's someone that you're going to want to try to convince, well, I can choose a couple of paths to go for my career. And I think maybe I want to be a law enforcement officer. And I know I can get up to $5,000 of my tuition reimbursed if I choose to become a law enforcement officer. And then they're going to have to, go for however long the professional peace officer education program lasts. I guess maybe that's another question that we could ask. If it's a particular 2-year course in community college that's geared toward law enforcement, if this applies to the peace officer certification, the 8-week certification course, or if this applies to the 4-year undergraduate degree requirements, how would it fit into there? But even so, and then they've got to work for a year after they've completed their education. So you're talking probably a several year long pipeline. So I'm just, I guess, questioning how much of an impact that's going to have on the short-term workforce needs. I can see the impact further down the road. And maybe this is valuable to do it just for that purpose. But maybe the author could address some of the concerns I have about sort of fulfilling our short-term workforce needs in the field and how long that pipeline would actually be as I'm kind of thinking through the way this is written.
Senator Chamberlain, any comment?
Yeah, just briefly, Mr. Chair and Senator Latz, if memory serves, the reason for the 1-year employment and it gets stretched out is simply because, first you had to get through all the courses and get hired, and then they want to make sure that, it's like a probationary period, right? Make sure you don't have any problems or trouble, but you want to make sure that you're reimbursing people who are solid, qualified, quality police officers. So that's, if memory serves, it's been a little bit, but that's why that's there.
Any further questions?
Mr. Chairman, as to my other questions,
Sure, Senator Lance.
I wonder if Senator Chamberlain could answer my other questions.
Could you repeat the question, Senator Lance?
As a practical matter, how long would the pipeline be before people who decide now to go into law enforcement would get some reimbursement? And exactly what programs in the professional education would this cover?
Senator Chamberlain.
Mr. Chair, Senator Latz, so if someone started in January of this year, the classes, they take the 2-year process, and then they take a post after the 2-year, if it hasn't changed much, then you could foreseeably say they got in the pipeline January, 2 years, plus probably another 6 months or a year for post issues, and then they had to get hired. So if you started in January, you might be eligible in 3-4 years, I would imagine, on one side of it. If you're already if you're near your completion of your post and your education, your post, you'd be eligible within 1 year. Or if you just started, you'd be eligible within a year as well, after 2021. So it could be very short for those that are already in, obviously. And if you're just finishing up, you have to serve a year. So at minimum, you could be eligible in a few months if you started last year. At most, it'll be several years because you got to complete the courses and do post and then work for a year.
Any other questions?
So, Mr. Chairman,
Senator Lance.
I like the idea of a tuition reimbursement program, and I like some of the guardrails that are here. I think another advantage to having the 12-month minimum employment is, it's going to go to someone who has at least demonstrated that they're actually going to go into law enforcement, at least for a certain period of time. So you're not just reimbursing tuition for someone who gets a degree and then decides to opt out of law enforcement as a career and go to some other direction. So I think that's a healthy guardrail on this. I just think maybe we need to be clear-eyed about, how helpful this will be in the short term to address our workforce issues as we put this together with other pieces of packages, and whether this would end up being the best way to approach that. And we'll have a chance, because this is being laid over, to evaluate all the pieces of the package, except the one that's already out the door, maybe two of them that are already out the door that we dealt with on the floor earlier this week. And we can maybe decide all of them make sense, or maybe decide some make more sense than others in terms of moving forward and making good use of the money that we do have available. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Latz. Any other questions or discussion? Hearing none, Senate File 2846 will be laid over. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members.
We'll now move on to Senate File 3073. Senator Gazelka. Welcome to the committee, Senator.
It's been a while, Mr. Chair, so good to
We
be here.
wanted to make sure we got you in front of our committee. Please
So,
proceed.
Mr. Chair, I have before the committee Senate File 3073, and just some brief comments ahead of time. I've had a number of conversations with the MPPOA, the chiefs of police, the highway patrol, about what is it that we need to think about doing to help get more police officers in their profession. And they talked about what I'm about to present, but they talked about short-term, 2-year degrees to help get more people in the pipeline, retention bonuses. They really laid out a lot of things that I think in a package will look really, really good and important. But there's a workforce shortage everywhere. I think that's pretty obvious. But the workforce shortage in the police is not just because of our aging population. The fact is morale is at an all-time low. It's a very, very dangerous profession that most had once at one time said this is an honorable, noble profession, but too many have maligned that. And as a result of the defund the police movement and some of the things that some wanted to do in regards to public safety, I think too many police officers don't know that they're as appreciated as they once were. And so as a result of that, there's not a lot of new people that are signing up to be police officers. It's, I talked to one police officer, they were looking to hire 10 police, and they had only 38 applicants. And in the end, if you don't have enough people that are applicants, you're not gonna get the best quality that you need. And so as we look at the results of less police on the streets, we see that crime is at some of the highest rates ever. Minneapolis has tied for the highest murder rates. St. Paul, highest murder rates ever, 2 carjackings a day. That's the Twin Cities, but frankly, this is happening throughout Minnesota as well. And so this particular piece that we're looking at today is how do we immediately get people to want to be police officers? And this is the immediate response that Senator Latz was looking for. It is a $10,000 hiring bonus or a bonus for somebody to become a police officer. It's paid 1 year later. It goes from the post board to the agency that hired that person. And if they're there for a year, they can get up to a $10,000 bonus. And so it's an incentive to get them into the pipeline. I don't think this is the only thing we're going to need to do. I think in the end, we're going to end up paying police officers more because it's riskier than ever. But this is an immediate reaction to how do we get more police officers in the pipeline. So in addition to that, I'll just say that if you're already a police officer, this does not apply to you. You can't move laterally over to another position that you wouldn't be eligible. This is new people coming into the profession. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Senator Gazelka. Any questions, Senator Bickham?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Gazelka. I think that the hiring bonuses we've shown has been productive, whether it's with restaurant workers through the pandemic, frontline workers. So I think that I don't have a problem with the bonuses. I'm going to, again, just ask that I think these are being laid over. I think we need to really have a conversation, and I have high expectations, Mr. Chair, that you will and your leadership will be talking to the post board about being able to administer all of these. I hope we can clean that part up. And I agree, Senator Gazelka, that we do have to pay officers more, nurses more, teachers more, daycare providers more. This pandemic is about a wage issue. And I hope that we continue to have those discussions throughout this session. But I also agree this isn't the only thing we have to do, and I think we have to be looking at how we're helping existing officers that are on departments as well, besides the grants for hiring new officers. I think we have to have a broader discussion about that as well.
Senator Latz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I share Senator Bigham's concerns that have already been expressed by her and by the post board about having the post board becoming a grant administering agency. And I know these bills set aside 3.5% for administration. At some point, we should add all of that up and see if that's an efficient use of creating additional bureaucracy to administer grants, especially when there are other state agencies that already have the infrastructure in place to do this, including a DPS. I don't know that there's necessarily any expertise within the post board that is special that would be necessary to effectively administer a grant program of this nature. If the criteria for eligibility are easily and clearly laid out, it should be fairly straightforward to administer. I guess I'm going to say some of the things I said on the floor on Monday when Senator Gazelka once again used his catchphrase, defunding police. Let's just be clear. There was a very small fraction of people that even used that phrase in the beginning. The Minneapolis charter amendment process was not at all about defunding the police. It was about reorganizing the delivery mechanism for public safety, which included a police department. No one, I shouldn't say no one, there were a few people, but it was by no means a broad cross-section of the population that was ever contemplating actually defunding police, but it's turned into a political phrase that is more effective for demagoguery than it is for serious policymaking. So I would really ask Senator Gazelka and others who see fit to use these phrases in press conferences as well as when presenting bills here or on the floor, that you not turn this into a political football, because this is about making serious policy. And we need to approach it seriously that way. And if we do it that way, I'm confident that we can find some bipartisan consensus to move forward on strengthening our recruitment and retention efforts within our law enforcement agencies. I also don't think it helps to continually reaffirm the issue of maligning police. Some of the worst things that have been done to affect the reputation of police have been done by some of the police officers themselves, and the resulting impact of that. Now, I am quick to say that the far, far vast majority of law enforcement officers do their job well. They do it right. They do it with respect and with diligence, and deserve a great deal of praise and admiration. But there are some that don't. And just like other professions where you get a few bad apples that can besmirch the reputation of a large number of the people in the profession, that's what's going on here. To simply continue to rephrase all of that doesn't advance the cause of the bill or the policy. It just raises the intensity of the political division around these issues, which I don't think is helpful in the end to improving public safety. So I would really encourage the proponents of this bill, other bills like that come before this committee or come before the Senate floor, to try to be productive in the use of their language rather than looking for sound bites that are going to end up in a press release or in a media headline somewhere for activities outside of the actual legislative process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Latz. Senator Gazelka?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Senator Latz, to comment there. When, in the beginning, all 12 of the Minneapolis City Council members voted that they wanted to defund the police. They modified from that, but that was unanimous. When there were union halls and recreational areas where the National Guard and the Highway Patrol were kicked out to jeers, that was a problem. When some of the public safety things that some on your side of the aisle wanted to do, like changing qualified immunity so that they would have to buy their own liability insurance, which is very expensive, that was an offense to them. And so I think we have to take a look at this. It does have to be bipartisan. I want the end result to be the fact that both sides of the aisle value greatly what our police officers do. But I don't think that you would find that the police organizations feel that right now. And so I welcome the idea that we're going to work on some of these things together, but we're in a dire place. Minneapolis went from 800 police officers down to somewhere around 300 when they actually wanted 1,200. They're down at least 300 police officers. St. Paul's down at least 100 police officers. The Highway Patrol is down at least 100 police officers. And think about that urgency. When crime is sky high, we have to pay attention to this. So I welcome the idea that this is going to be bipartisan, but we cannot forget some of the callous statements that were said by too many people without acknowledging that those were very callous.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Latz?
I think we fall into a logical fallacy when we take callous statements by a fairly limited number of people and we make it appear as if it's a widespread belief that's held in a broad cross-section of a community. And you can just witness the way Minneapolis clearly rejected the charter amendment as evidence of that. And I don't recall that the Minneapolis City Council vote was to defund the police in the sense of eliminating the police department and taking 100% of that budget and doing something else with it. I don't think that was ever on the table, certainly not as a serious policy advancement, and to suggest otherwise, I think, is misleading. And I will further note that this bill, like all the public safety bills that have come before this committee so far, have authorship which is entirely Republican. Not one bipartisan author on any of these. No effort whatsoever made by the majority in this body to make this a bipartisan issue. So it's one thing to say you welcome the bipartisan support, but it's time to walk the talk.
Why don't we get back to the bill itself? Members, Senator Matthews?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the discussion we've had on the bill so far. I listened carefully, Mr. Chair, to the way that the bill was presented, and I believe it was largely accurate. I think the history, while we can debate on how large of a role that played, definitely had an impact, and I can prove that to you by just talking to law enforcement in my district. I have officers, I have departments in my area in rural Minnesota. I could give you names of departments, I could give you names of leaders that had officers that had just gotten into the profession decide and say, you know, it's not worth it. I'm gonna go find something else to do and leave. I had just, we've heard many stories similar to this, but I'll name another one that's recent. In my district, was talking to another high-ranking officer in one of my sheriff's departments, and he mentioned that they're trying to hire for a couple of spots right now. And he said when he got into the profession before, there'd be hundreds of applicants for every one opening. and it was highly competitive, and it allowed agencies to choose the best of the best to get into their profession. He said right now, for the openings I have in my department, I have 5 applications. And he raises questions on whether any of them meet the qualifications that they would want to have, that they would prefer to have, if they could choose the best of the best. So issues like these, I think bonuses like these are clearly a good step in that direction, because I think the feedback I've gotten even in my own rural district is that the pool of applicants needs to expand. It will not help us long-term to keep getting by with just a couple applicants for every one position. We need to get back to expanding that field where there is multiple applicants, a highly competitive field, and motivation to make yourself the best of the best and be worthy of being hired in that position. So I think that this bill is a good idea. It is to address things that have happened recently, and I appreciate the supporters for bringing this bill forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Matthews. Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members. I think this is a good idea, but I think it's a good idea because we have a workforce shortage in general, not just among police officers. And I think it's a good idea to raise wages for police officers and teachers and childcare workers and emergency personnel and nurses and healthcare workers. I think it's also a good idea to pay college expenses because our colleges are too expensive. And I know right now in the trades, there are many opportunities to have your college expenses paid for once you're on the work site. I also support better working conditions. I think sometimes, it's dangerous in many of these work situations, and I support better pensions and paid time off and family leave. I mean, there's lots of things that we can do, and I hope to see the Republicans supporting many of these initiatives down the road.
Thank you, Senator Pappas. I don't believe there's anyone else who wishes to make comment. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to make comment regarding this bill? I see none, so we will lay over Senate File 3073 for possible consideration later. I'll be handing the gavel over to Senator Johnson.
Thank you,
And I
Mr.
will-
Chair and members. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Senator Gazelka. I'll be presenting Senator Jasinski's bill. He cannot be with us today. Senate File 2934.
Senator Limmer, to your bill.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate File 2934 addresses mental health in the law enforcement and first responder communities and addresses an appropriation. Just some opening comments. The Heroes Helping Heroes organization is a 501c3 organization that provides non-medical support to assist law enforcement officers, fire personnel, and EMS to cope with mental health conditions caused by their employment, specifically PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. Through various events, Heroes Helping Heroes provides first responders suffering from PTSD and other work-related mental health issues an opportunity to network, relax, and socialize with others facing similar hardships. Heroes Helping Heroes hosts events at little or no cost to its members. Their mission is to provide all first responders with a continued sense of support and family. The bonds remain intact to help and support one another through difficult times. These bonds remind retired first offenders that they are not forgotten. Heroes Helping Heroes is statewide and has membership across the entire state and from all of the first responder professions. Well, the question might remain why Heroes Helping Heroes is needed. Well, it's estimated that approximately 3.5% of the average U.S. population suffers from PTSD. Those are figures coming from the Department of Justice. However, 15% of police officers suffer from PTSD. 20% of firefighters and EMS personnel also suffer from PTSD. Unfortunately, there's a stigma that follows PTSD among these professions, and I'm assuming these figures that I just quoted are relatively low, as they rely upon self-reporting, and a lot of individuals simply won't do that. In conclusion, this organization helps first responders who are often put in harm's way for the safety of the public, cope with mental health ailments, and hopefully get them back on the track to live productive lives. Now, I do understand that we'll be laying this bill over today for future considerations, but I'd like to add just a final thought about including language in the future that would make this a more competitive grant process, along with some reporting measures to ensure accountability. But the bill is before us. It's an appropriation of $1 million this year, appropriated from the general fund to provide a grant to the Heroes Helping Heroes organization to fund mental health treatment for present and former emergency personnel. And with that, I would like to thank our co-authors, Senator Ingebrigtsen, Howe, Hoffman, and of course, Chief Author Jasinski. We do have testifiers, Mr. Chairman, and I would like to call them up. The first one would be Chris Stewart. He's the founder of Heroes Helping Heroes.
All right, thank you, Senator Limmer. Mr. Stewart, please come forward, state your name, and you may proceed after that.
Mr. Chair, members of the Senate, Senator Limmer, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Chris Stewart, and I am a retired Minneapolis Police Sergeant and now founder and president of Heroes Helping Heroes. A little history or background about me. I spent a little over 14 and a half years with Minneapolis Police Department. The vast majority of that time was spent as a patrol officer patrolling Minneapolis's 4th Precinct in North Minneapolis. I also spent time in our plainclothes weapons investigations unit, investigating precinct-wide weapons or narcotics cases. Spent some time in the 4th Precinct Neighborhood Drug Patrol Unit, investigating precinct-level weapons or narcotics cases. I also spent time with our FBI Safe Streets unit, as well as serving for 2 years on our SWAT team. Let me talk about some of the calls that we as police officers and first responders deal with on a daily basis. Some of these calls I have personally been involved with. Other calls my former colleagues and Heroes Helping Heroes members have been associated with. When people think about mental health and PTSD and law enforcement and first responders, they automatically assume that we're talking about officers who are being shot at and who have unfortunately had to use deadly force to save themselves, their partners, or members of the community. Although this happens way too often, including an incident over the weekend in Eden Valley where an officer was shot, thankfully only grazed, in the knee by a suspect. This no longer shocks the conscience of society. Again, this happens way too often. A large incident that triggered a lot of first responders, particularly Minneapolis police officers, to leave this profession after being diagnosed with PTSD were the riots in 2020. Numerous police officers were shot at during this time, and not a single incident ever made the local media or gained any attention through society. Hundreds of officers were also injured throughout this process, including an officer who had a brick thrown at his face, broke his jaw, and knocked out numerous teeth. Many others suffered hearing injuries, eye injuries, and other injuries that required surgery. This also included when the third precinct was being burnt down, when the protesters invaded that precinct and threatened harm to our first responders. Many police officers were fearful that that was their last night at work. Many also talked about saving the last bullet for themselves so they wouldn't be taken alive by these protesters. For a lot of us going through that situation, every day we went to work, we said goodbye to our families, not knowing if that was the last time we'd see them. Other calls that police officers and first responders have dealt with and deal with on a daily basis include the collapse of the 35W bridge, where officers and first responders watched helplessly as the victims drowned to death in vehicles and a semi-truck driver burned to death after his semi was crushed by concrete. Those screams of that semi-truck driver will never leave those first responders. It haunts them every single day. First responders also deal with numerous drownings and burn victims each year. One in particular was a fire in Minneapolis that killed the entire family, and a police officer held a 7-year-old as she took her last breaths. First responders also deal with hangings. One in particular that I dealt with was an individual who hung himself in North Minneapolis from his deck. We later had to cut him down after the scene was processed. Another one, a 13-year-old boy, ended up hanging himself from a street sign. First responders that day were lucky enough to get to him before he took his own life. But weeks later, he unfortunately succeeded and took his own life in another way. Yet we have other first responders who have thankfully gotten to these scenes quick enough to help these victims and hold them up while waiting for other first responders to arrive at the scene and cut down these victims. First responders also deal with hundreds of car accidents each year. Some where victims sustained severed limbs and even decapitated heads. Another incident in Minneapolis that some of my colleagues went on and still haunt them to this day was where this father massacred his wife and 5 young children with a samurai sword. When first responders arrived to the scene, these small children were cut up and breathless throughout the entire house. This was extremely difficult, especially for our first responders who have children. Another incident was where a grandmother, or an aunt, was watching 2 small children, and she decided that she was sick of listening to them cry and whine. So she killed these 2 small children, her niece and her nephew, stuffed them in garbage bags in the closet, like garbage. And these bodies were later discovered by Minneapolis police. I myself have personally dealt with and seen hundreds of dead bodies. These bodies are still in the environment where they died, responding to chaotic shooting scenes where you can still smell the gunpowder in the air, or dealing with check the welfare of individuals who haven't been heard from in days or weeks, where you open a door to this house to check on the welfare and are immediately taken back by the smell of decomposing flesh. You yet have a job to do. You must go inside this house and determine what is going on. Once you locate the body, many times it has been days since they passed away. Their body fluids have drained down to the lowest part of their body. And as you attempt to roll them over, these fluids start gushing out through their decomposed skin. These bodies are often filled with hundreds, if not thousands, of maggots crawling out from their body, as well as every crevice of their body. Police officers and first responders are attacked way too often, numerous times throughout their career, not because who they are as individuals, but because of the badge and the uniform that they wear and what this badge and uniform represents to society. For each one of these stories, there are thousands more that are not being told that are just like these. So now let's talk about why I created or founded Heroes Helping Heroes. After the riots in 2020, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. I was unfortunately unable to return to a profession that I loved, that I spent my entire career obtaining since I was a young child. Going through this process, even though there was 150 Minneapolis cops or so going through this process at the same exact time I was, we all felt isolated, abandoned, alone, and that we had nobody to turn to. There were no programs out there for us who were suffering from mental health, work-related injuries. Minneapolis, along with many other departments, failed not only myself, my colleagues, but a lot of first responders. They attempt to set up EPA programs, employee assistance programs, through their department, but they're inefficient, and there is zero trust between first responders and the departments they work for. A lot of times these departments shame their officers for seeking help. So let's talk about Heroes Helping Heroes. Senator Limmer addressed this a little bit, so let me expand on it. Heroes Helping Heroes, we're a nonprofit 501c3 organization dedicated to helping all of our first responders, police, fire, and EMS who are suffering from work-related mental health issues, specifically PTSD. We give our members the opportunity to participate in different events with one another to build those bonds and to cope with the stresses of their professions. Heroes Helping Heroes is for both retired and current first responders. We try to emphasize our current first responders to keep them mentally sound so that they can continue to do a job and profession that they love. 100% of our proceeds that we collect through Heroes Helping Heroes goes directly back into the foundation. Not a single one of us collect a paycheck. Also, all of our board members have either been touched personally by mental health issues and PTSD or work closely and are related to those who have. Heroes Helping Heroes was founded in March of 2020. We have quickly gained the support of fellow first responders across the state and are considered to be trusted and a reliable source for information. So when our members come to us, they can be reassured that we have their best interests in mind. In 2021, our first event was held in June. Since that first event, in 2021 alone, we held over 30 different events for our members, helping 219 of our members, plus an additional 50 or so of their family members. All of our programs and events are based off of military research and scientific evidence from our military and those who suffer from mental health and PTSD. In the United States, last year, 171 police officers committed suicide. So far this year, 23 have already committed suicide. That equates to almost 1.5 first responders, including police, fire, and EMS, who take their lives each day. Unfortunately, we had an incident over the weekend in greater Minnesota where a firefighter ended up taking his own life. This is extremely tragic, not only for the first responder community, but also, more importantly, to the firefighter's family, who was survived by his wife and 4 young children. Let me emphasize this again, and I can't stress this enough, that we get no support from our police or fire departments. Our departments are not relied upon. They have no faith by their employees, and they do not provide our first responders with an ample opportunity to address and treat their mental health issues. It took decades for America to recognize PTSD in our military. It is now starting to be recognized in our first responder community, especially law enforcement, but it is much too slow. Communities and cities far often are demonizing, belittling, and shaming their employees from seeking help. This is why I'm requesting the Senate here today and in the future, the House and the Governor, to sign off on a bill funding Heroes Helping Heroes so we can continue to serve our first responders throughout the entire state of Minnesota. Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you. I would like to, I'm sorry, not.
Quite all right, quite all right. But, no, Mr. Stewart, just, I want to say thank you, a heartfelt thank you for the work that you've done and your organization. We appreciate the sacrifices you've made, and it is an honor to have you here today with us. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Anything further to say?
Mr. Chair, we have other testifiers to listen to. But before we do that, I wanted to point out there's a number of letters of support in our packets. Please read them. They're very interesting. Various people that are in the first responder category, and a letter from NAMI, National Alliance of Mental Illness, who also support this bill. But, Mr. Chair, you have the list of the other testifiers, so I hand it back to you.
Thank you, Senator Lemmer. From here, if Mr. Stewart, you can sit back in your seat again, and we'll call forward Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kelly, will you state your name for the record, and you can proceed with your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Terry Kelly, and I was a police officer for over 20 years, 14 years with Inver Grove Heights, 9 years with the state of Minnesota. I live in Senator Bigham's district, and I would be much briefer than our leader was. I won't reiterate the things he said, because as he spoke, it was starting to get hard to breathe, sorry. And I don't want to go over all the things that we see that cause PTSD again. But, you know, myself and many people like me, we have dreams and memories and things that we can't get rid of, as much as we don't want them. My daughter's with, and she's almost 21, and she was having a hard time during Chris's testimony. You know, I guess I'm kind of fortunate. My wife and my daughter have been around since my wife and I just celebrated our 26th Valentine's Day together. So I'm fortunate in that she knew me before I was in this profession. And nothing hurt more than when she said to me, "Your daughter and I are afraid of you." And sorry. So anyway, that was a big thing for me, and I started this process. And when you go through this process, you're isolated and alone, you're depressed, and you tend to sit at home and do nothing. You don't want to talk to people. You feel like nobody wants to talk to you. And this organization has helped because I kind of found out about it through I was fortunate, long story, but it needs to get out there more. And so I joined this organization, and one thing that this organization does for us is one of the things about PTSD is that you don't do the things you used to enjoy. So let's say fishing was your hobby and you used to enjoy that. You don't do that anymore. I let my fishing license lapse. I sold my boat. I stopped going fishing. So when the organization offers activities to try to get you out of the house, you run into other like-minded people and you do things that you used to enjoy doing. So you have that familiarity and you're enjoying yourself. And you find out that there's a lot of other people like you. And there's a lot of other people that have the same struggles as you. And it's been immensely helpful to me. I've reconnected with people that I never would have reconnected with because you're like, wow, you went through this too. And you never would have dreamed that was the case. And so I have found that it's been very helpful to get out and do those things and participate in activities. And I think others would find that very beneficial too. I know a few people who have become members of the program but haven't really stepped outside to do these things yet. And I think that if there was more things offered and the diversity of things that they're able to offer would increase. So I think that it would be very valuable to myself and everybody else to be able to experience some of those things that Heroes Helping Heroes do. And I greatly appreciate Chris and all the work that he's done, and I try to help out in any way I can. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I appreciate your time and consideration of this bill, and at this time I'll yield my time.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. And Mr. Kelly, you mentioned that you have your daughter here with you. What's her name?
Her name is Jennifer.
Thank you for coming, Jennifer. It's been good to see both of you here. Appreciate you sharing your story in front of the committee today, even though it must be incredibly tough. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
At this time, we'll call forward Mr. Jeff Eming. Mr. Eming, if you would, when you get settled down, just state your name for the record and begin your comments.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you for having me today. My name is Jeff Emming. I'm currently a police officer, actually a sergeant for Minneapolis Police Department. Excuse me. This year will be my 25th anniversary for work. I started the department in 97, 98, and throughout my career with Minneapolis Police Department, I've worked in various assignments. I've worked for 3rd Precinct Community Response Team, 911 Patrol specifically in the 3rd Precinct. I spent majority of my career in 3rd Precinct actually, so I established a relationship with the businesses there, working on a direct patrol unit, as well as the community response team, and answering 911 calls in that district as well. Throughout my time at the 3rd Precinct, I was able to work for the gang strike unit as well, and on top of that, I worked for the FBI Safe Streets Task Force for approximately 5 years. So these assignments that I mentioned specifically target or weapons, guns, drugs, extreme violent people. And I guess you could say half of my career was spent in investigations as an officer, and then half of it was responding to 911 calls, working in probably the highest 911 call district in the city with stabbings, shootings, homicides, and I can relate to Chris Steward's memories of what he's experienced, and I shared those same 911 calls with him. I believe that each officer has PTSD in some shape or form, and it's you kind of take that and put it in the back of your mind, and they kind of add up, over years and over time. So my current assignment, I was promoted to sergeant in 2019. So my current assignment is I'm actually a patrol sergeant. So I'm responsible for scheduling, staffing, morale, roll calls, civil disturbances, protests, riots, stabbing, shootings, advice, discipline. So basically, for instance, I had to work last night. We did have another protest that pops up. So the protest was approximately 45 people, which, thankfully the protest was peaceful. But each one of these incidents is a trigger, and it adds up because you don't know that one time that you're going to respond to a protest where it could get out of control based on one person's actions. So this organization, Heroes Helping Heroes, has helped me come back to reality and keep me in the department. So these are my fellow colleagues that has since retired with PTSD. I still communicate with them. I formed a bond with them over the years, and this has helped me in so many ways that I actually advocate for Heroes Helping Heroes with my current officers. So at roll call, I address my officers and I give them the resources that's out there and that's needed, especially at a time as of right now. I went as far as to asking businesses for money to support this as well, and I have been successful with reaching out to a local business for contributions as well. So with that said, I'm hoping I covered everything that I needed to cover during this time, and this is an organization that is definitely needed during this extreme time in law enforcement. So with that said, I'll end my time there.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate you coming in. Sure. Great to see you here.
Thank you.
And our last first responder, Mr. Rutcher. Please take a seat, and when you're prepared, state your name and begin with your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Kurt Rutcher. I began law enforcement in 1994 as a police officer with the Air National Guard. Became a sworn officer in the late 90s, and I worked for smaller departments to ending my career in St. Paul. I worked from a patrol officer to a training officer to a canine officer, use of force. These are jobs that I absolutely loved and was very happy to be a part of. In 2007, I went to St. Paul, where I was involved in several incidents. As we talked, everybody goes through these things, and we could I could literally sit here for days and go over incidents that I had, and I won't do that. But PTSD is very real to me. I was diagnosed in 2012 and had to leave law enforcement. My last 5 years, I was nearly killed 4 times in St. Paul. From being drugged by a van across a parking lot, to a man hiding behind a water heater with a knife trying to stab me, to another guy trying to shoot me with a gun. PTSD isn't just a term. It's something we live with. I see a Chrysler 300 darked out on the freeway and I instantly get the sweats and my heart races because that's the guy, what he was driving when he tried to kill me. I go into somebody else's basement behind a water heater and things get stirred up. And I left 10 years ago, and 5 years after I left law enforcement, My 14-and-a-half-year-old son Cody was killed in an ATV accident where I was first on scene. When I left law enforcement, my fellow coworkers were told not to talk to me because it interferes with work comp. I didn't have that support network there helping me. I didn't have another person walking me through this. PTSD wasn't as common as it is today. So I battled that alone. I went from putting people in an ambulance to being in the back of an ambulance trying to take my own life. And it's very hard to swallow as you see those ambulances go by when you know you helped a bunch of people and then you were in there being helped. I reached out to a lot of organizations through my veteran status and found different places, but there was nothing for law enforcement. And I was able to connect with Heroes Helping Heroes. And I'm here speaking on behalf because I believe it's absolutely necessary to help mental health for officers, for firefighters. 10 years, people didn't talk to me. You were either in the club or you were out of the club, and I'd be on a fishing trip and sitting and talking with officers who treated me like I was still on the road, like I was still on a shift. They didn't look down on me. They didn't question what I'd been through or if I couldn't cut it anymore. So I just find that it's very beneficial for mental health. There needs to be a lot more programs out there. Like I said, I'm involved in several with veterans organizations, but veterans, when they are involved in wartime and PTSD, that usually is equated to a certain place. Where law enforcement and first responders, it's everywhere. I go to the grocery store and it's the same officers that I work with. I go to Menards and there's somebody I arrested. There's no relief anywhere from this, but you can take time, an hour or two, or an afternoon to sit with people who get it, who won't judge you, who you might be triggered and start crying for no reason, just to have a hand on your shoulder to help get you through the day. And that's what PTSD is. It's learning to live with these triggers and how they come at you, and effectively being able to have coping skills or people to call who can help you. I can call Chris any time of the night, any time of the morning, tell him any kind of thoughts I'm having, and he's not gonna look down on me. He's gonna see what he can do to help me out. And we need a lot more people and organizations like that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments and for coming in today. Really appreciate that. Last on my list is Ms. Finn. So again, please state your name for the record and you may begin your comments.
Mr. Chair and members, my name is Ann Finn, and I represent the League of Minnesota Cities. We are a statewide association representing 837 of Minnesota's 854 cities. I'm here today because I'm very glad this bill is before you. It elevates a very important issue, and that is public safety, mental health. There's no question we need to do more for our public safety employees. Duty disability trends are very concerning, particularly duty disability trends related to PTSD. And I wanted to give you a little data today. According to the Public Employees Retirement Association, or PARA, the number of duty disability claims have been escalating over the past 3 years. In 2019, there were 118 public safety duty disability applications. In 2020, there were 241 applications. In 2021, there were 307. More than 80% of these applications were for PTSD, and 93% of them are law enforcement personnel. The average age of an individual seeking a duty disability retirement is 42. Our cities are very concerned about the human and financial tolls related to these trends. First of all, we know that employees and their families are hurting. The agencies are stretched thin, and I think you've all heard this. I've heard you talk about it in one-on-one meetings and on the floor. And the active employees are feeling overwhelmed and overworked. Furthermore, the benefits paid to disabled employees, including continued health insurance until age 65, are straining local budgets. In short, this bill is helpful, but we don't think it goes far enough. We would like to be able to recruit, retain, and most importantly, support our very valuable public safety employees. And if we're going to do this, we need to make significant investments in public safety mental wellness, including implementing comprehensive measures aimed at injury prevention, providing adequate treatment, and providing financial support for employees and employers so that injured employees can get the help they need and ideally stay on the job or get better and return to work. I'm currently working with Senator Howe on a comprehensive bill for your consideration, and it's being drafted as we speak. We do not oppose the bill before you, but we think there's more work to be done. And we look forward to continuing that work and that discussion as you progress through this legislative session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got a question from Senator Kiffmeyer. Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't really have a question. Well, I do, and I think you might be good to answer it. My understanding, though, is that the city's law enforcement, all these areas, do have health insurance, and that they're required to cover mental health for treatment and other things like that. And so they do have that. What I saw that was different here in Heroes Helping Heroes, very unique function. This is peer-to-peer and the kind of mental health support that comes from people having both been in these kinds of situations. They relate the way they do very differently and very uniquely. And I don't think they're saying they substitute for that mental health treatment from maybe a paid source, a provider, kind of things like that. So the League of Minnesota Cities and the cities do provide health insurance that covers mental health. I just want to affirm that you already do that, correct?
Ms. Finn?
Mr. Chair and Senator Kiffmeyer, that's a great question. The league does not provide the health insurance, but our cities provide health insurance to their employees. And I did want to comment on your peer support point. We actually have employed a full-time person at the leagues in our insurance trust just to roll out more peer support programs because we know it works. The things that you heard about from Heroes Helping Heroes, we know that those strategies work. We'd like to get them deployed on the front end before someone is even exposed to potential injuries so that when they can talk to people in real time. And we know that that program works and we're trying to expand it, but we may be asking the legislature to partner with us to get more of that out there, to support the work that Heroes Helping Heroes is doing and expand upon it.
Thank you. Senator Kiffmeyer?
Yeah, thank you. I would say, though, that peer support in this situation is very, very different. I think the point you make, though, is many times it's cumulative. And so you have an unresolved issue at the first trauma, and then you have the second, third, and fourth. They actually get progressively more difficult because of the memory of the first. And so I have a family member who dealt with alcoholism, but one of the ways that they found in their deciding on which approach to deal with it was that in his teenage years, there was a trauma incident that made him vulnerable to choosing to use alcohol to escape the pain of that. They walked him through a type of PTSD type of treatment, and that was it. It was targeted to that unique situation, but it was also within a service-connected situation. And so the treatment and the care came in that area and was very, very effective. And one time worked, and that was it, no more alcohol after that. But I think it was because of the effectiveness of what it did. That was a type of both mental health treatment and peer-to-peer. But I think what we're seeing here is getting back to health is different than dealing with the treatment of the origination of the issue. So it's kind of like many people, you might have a broken leg, and it's great to be in a cast and heal. Once you get out, that's a weak leg, and you've got to get it exercised and get it back to strength again, and that takes a different kind of care. So, Mr. Chair, I really do support this bill, and I think it has a unique approach, and I'm glad to hear we're going to strongly consider this and appreciate all of you and the testimony you gave. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer. Any further comments or questions regarding the bill? Seeing none, we will lay this bill over for possible inclusion. With that, I'll turn the gavel back over to Senator Limmer.
Thank you. Thank you, well, I guess you are Mr. Chair until I talk. Thank you, Senator Johnson. There's no further business before the committee. We stand adjourned.